Maya sang for $1 million lie in a restaurant full of billionaires who watched her humiliation like sport. The moment Eleanor Ashford recognized her voice as identical to a woman who died in 1963, Maya's life as a struggling waitress ended, and her war against one of Asia's most powerful families began. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Some voices are born to be heard. Others are buried beneath the weight of circumstance, hidden behind trays of overpriced appetizers and forced smiles. For 23-year-old Maya Chun, her voice was both a gift and a curse. Reminder of dreams deferred and a past she couldn't afford to remember. She had learned to keep it quiet, to hum softly while polishing silverware in the back room of the Belvedere Club, one of the most exclusive dining establishments in the city. The irony wasn't lost on her. She served $100 steaks to people who spent more on a single meal than she earned in a week, all while the voice that had once earned her a full scholarship to the Manhattan Conservatory of Music remained locked away, silent as the grave of her abandoned dreams. The Belvedere Club wasn't just a restaurant. It was a temple of wealth, a place where billionaires and power brokers conducted business over truffle risotto and aged Bordeaux. The dining room was all vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers, with walls paneled in rich mahogany that seemed to absorb sound and secrets in equal measure. Maya had been working there for 8 months, ever since her mother's cancer diagnosis had turned their lives into a cascading nightmare of medical bills and impossible choices. The conservatory scholarship had been rescinded when she'd missed too many performances. They'd been sympathetic, of course, but sympathy didn't pay tuition, and it certainly didn't cure stage 4 lymphoma. On this particular Friday evening, the Belvedere was buzzing with its usual collection of the obscenely wealthy. Maya moved through the dining room with practiced efficiency, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek bun, her expression pleasantly neutral. She had mastered the art of invisibility, of being present but not really seen, a skill every good server learns but few perfect. She refilled water glasses, delivered plates with silent grace, and absorbed the conversations around her like background noise. Mergers and acquisitions, yacht purchases, complaints about the quality of staff at their Hamptons estates. It was a different universe, one that existed parallel to her own, but never touching, never intersecting in any meaningful way. She was clearing plates from table 7 when she first noticed him. He sat alone at a corner booth, a man in his early 40s with the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers and boardroom war rooms. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored to perfection, and he wore it with the casual confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. His phone lay face down on the white tablecloth, ignored. His eyes, a cold slate blue, tracked her movement across the room with an intensity that made her skin prickle. There was something predatory about his gaze, something that suggested he was used to evaluating things, people, and finding them wanting. Marcus Crane. She'd heard the name whispered by the other servers, by the mater d' who'd personally escorted him to his table. He was a tech CEO, one of those Silicon Valley transplants who'd taken his billions and his god complex to the East Coast. His company, Crane Technologies, had revolutionized cloud computing or artificial intelligence or some other realm of innovation that Maya didn't fully understand. What she did understand was that men like Marcus Crane were dangerous in their own particular way. They saw the world as something to be optimized, disrupted, conquered, and anyone who didn't fit into their algorithm of success was simply noise to be filtered out. Maya's section didn't include his table, but she watched from the corner of her eye as Jennifer, one of the senior servers, approached him with the evening specials. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could read the body language. Marcus barely looked up from his phone. Jennifer's smile became increasingly strained. When she walked away, her cheeks were flushed with either embarrassment or anger. Possibly both. The evening progressed in its usual rhythm until the moment everything changed. It started with a woman's voice, bright and commanding, cutting through the subdued murmur of expensive conversation. Maya turned to see a figure entering the dining room, and the entire restaurant seemed to shift its attention, a collective intake of breath. Eleanor Ashford was a legend, even to people like Maya who didn't typically follow the movements of the ultra-rich. At 87 years old, she was one of the wealthiest women in America. A self-made billionaire who'd built a media empire from a single radio station she'd bought with borrowed money in the 1950s. She was dressed in deep burgundy, her white hair styled in an elegant wave, her posture ramrod straight despite her age. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, but they were understated, tasteful. Eleanor Ashford didn't need to announce her wealth. It preceded her like a force of nature. She was escorted to a table near Marcus Crane's booth, and Maya watched as the CEO's attention finally lifted from his phone. Even from across the room, she could see the calculation in his eyes, the recognition of an opportunity. Eleanor Ashford wasn't just wealthy. She was connected, influential, a kingmaker in certain circles. A word from her could open doors that even billions of dollars couldn't unlock. Maya was assigned to refill water glasses in that section, a task that brought her close enough to overhear fragments of conversation. Eleanor had a voice that carried, despite its age, melodious and warm, with an accent that suggested old money and older traditions. She was ordering from Samuel, the head waiter, discussing wine pairings with the easy knowledge of someone who'd been drinking Burgundy burgundy since before most of the staff were born. It was as Maya was refilling Eleanor's water glass that Marcus Crane made his move. He stood from his booth, smoothed his already perfect tie, and approached Eleanor's table with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. "Excuse me, Mrs. Ashford," he began, his voice smooth as aged scotch. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity to introduce myself. I'm Marcus Crane, CEO of Crane Technologies. I've long admired your work in media innovation." Eleanor looked up at him, her pale blue eyes sharp and assessing. She didn't smile, didn't offer the warmth he was clearly expecting. "Mr. Crane," she said, her tone polite but decidedly cool, "I'm aware of who you are. Your company's data privacy practices made headlines last month. Something about selling user information to third-party advertisers without proper disclosure." The temperature at the table dropped several degrees. Marcus's smile didn't waver, but Maya, standing close enough to see, noticed the tightening around his eyes, the slight clench of his jaw. "That was a misunderstanding that's been completely resolved," he said smoothly. "We're committed to transparency and user protection. In fact, I'd love to discuss potential partnership opportunities with Ashford. I think our platforms could be mutually beneficial." "I don't do business with people I don't trust, Mr. Crane," Eleanor said, picking up her wine glass and taking a delicate sip. "And I certainly don't discuss business deals in the middle of my dinner. Perhaps you should return to your table." It was a dismissal, elegant but absolute. Maya had to suppress a smile as she moved away to refill another glass. It wasn't often that someone put Marcus Crane in his place, and the satisfaction was evident in the subtle shift of energy in the room. Other diners had noticed the interaction, were watching with barely concealed interest, but Marcus Crane wasn't a man who accepted rejection gracefully. Instead of returning to his booth, he stood there, his smile hardening into something uglier, more petulant. "You know, Mrs. Ashford," he said, his voice carrying across the now quiet section of the dining room, "I think you're making a mistake. Today's world, legacy media is dying. You need people like me, not the other way around." Eleanor set down her wine glass with deliberate care. "Young man," she said, and there was steel beneath the velvet of her voice, "I was disrupting industries before your parents were born. I don't need lectures from someone whose primary innovation was convincing venture capitalists that privacy violations are acceptable business practices. Now please return to your table before I have you removed." The humiliation was public, undeniable. A few diners had the grace to look away, but others watched with the fascinated horror of people witnessing a car crash. Marcus Crane's face flushed red, his hands clenching at his sides. Maya could see the rage building in him, the toxic masculinity of a man unused to being challenged, especially by a woman, especially by an elderly woman who should have, in his worldview, shown him deference and respect. And that's when he snapped. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Maya, who was frozen mid-pour at a nearby table, her water pitcher suspended in the air. Something cruel and calculating crossed his face. He pointed directly at her, his finger accusatory and dismissive. "You!" he called out, his voice loud enough that conversation throughout the entire dining room ceased. "The girl with the water pitcher. Come here." Maya's heart began to hammer in her chest. Every instinct told her to pretend she hadn't heard, to disappear into the kitchen, but she couldn't. Samuel, the head waiter, was watching. The Belvedere's manager had emerged from his office, drawn by the commotion. She set down the pitcher with hands that trembled slightly and walked toward Marcus Crane's outstretched finger, feeling like she was walking toward an executioner. "What's your name?" he demanded when she stood before him. "Maya, sir," she said quietly, hating the subservience in her own voice, hating that this man, this overgrown child throwing a tantrum, had the power to make her feel small. "Maya," he repeated, as if tasting the word, finding it lacking. "Tell me, Maya, do you sing?" The question was so unexpected, so bizarre, that Maya simply stared at him. The entire restaurant was watching now, a theater of the wealthy bearing witness to whatever fresh humiliation Marcus Crane was about to orchestrate. "Do you sing, Maya?" Marcus repeated, his voice dripping with mock curiosity and barely concealed contempt. The question hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. Maya's throat went dry. She did sing. She had sung, past tense, a life that belonged to a different version of herself, one who'd believed that talent and hard work could overcome circumstances. That Maya had performed at Carnegie Hall at 16, had been told by instructors that she had the kind of voice that came along once in a generation. But that Maya was gone, buried beneath medical bills and double shifts and the constant exhaustion of simply surviving. "I used to," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. Marcus leaned forward, cupping his ear in an exaggerated gesture of someone straining to hear. "What was that? Speak up. We can't hear you back here." "I used to sing," Maya repeated, louder this time, feeling the heat of shame crawling up her neck. Her fellow servers were watching, expressions ranging from sympathy to relief that they weren't the ones in the spotlight. Samuel, the head waiter, looked like he wanted to intervene but was paralyzed by the social dynamics of the situation. Marcus Crane was a valued client. His tab tonight alone would be more than Samuel made in 2 weeks. "Used to," Marcus said, savoring the words. "How sad. But surely you remember how. Tell you what, Maya, I'm going to make you an offer, an incredibly generous offer." He pulled out his phone, made a show of opening his banking app, and turned the screen toward her. "I will transfer $1 million into your account right now tonight if you sing for me. Just one song, any song you like." His smile was a slash of cruelty across his handsome face. The number was absurd, Impossible. $1 million would pay for her mother's treatment. It would clear their debt. It would give her mother a fighting chance at life instead of the slow, agonizing decline the doctors had predicted. Maya's hands trembled at her side. She looked at Marcus Crane's face, saw the challenge there, the certainty that she would refuse, that he was making this offer precisely because he knew she wouldn't take it, couldn't take it, that the humiliation of performing like a trained animal in the middle of the Belvedere Club was too much to ask of anyone, with any shred of dignity. But then she thought of her mother, lying in a hospital bed across town, her body ravaged by poison they called treatment, fighting a war she was losing inch by inch, day by day. She thought of the collection notices piling up on their tiny apartment's kitchen table, the calls from debt agencies that she'd stopped answering. She thought of the conservatory of the dreams she'd abandoned, not because she'd failed, but because life had demanded a different kind of courage than the courage it took to stand on a stage. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. "I'll do it," Maya heard herself say, her voice stronger now, clearer. The restaurant seemed to collectively gasp. Even Marcus looked momentarily surprised, as if he'd expected her to refuse, to give him the satisfaction of watching her choose pride over desperate necessity. His surprise was quickly replaced by gleeful malice. "Excellent," he said, clapping his hands together. "Then by all means, Maya, the floor is yours. Entertain us. Earn your $1 million. Maya felt like she was watching herself from a great distance as she walked to the center of the dining room. The Belvedere had excellent acoustics, designed to carry conversation without echoing, to create intimacy in a large space. It would also, she knew, carry her voice perfectly. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the faces watching her. The mixture of pity and fascination and secondhand embarrassment. She thought of her mother, of the way she used to sing Maya to sleep when she was a child, old jazz standards and folk songs, her voice warm and full of love. She thought of the first time she'd sung in public at a school talent show when she was 8, the way the auditorium had gone silent, the way her teacher had cried afterward and told her she had a gift. She opened her mouth and began to sing. The song that came out wasn't one she'd planned. It was Summertime. The Gershwin class, a song she'd performed 100 times, but never quite like this, never with this weight of desperation and defiance. Her voice started soft, almost tentative, the opening notes floating into the hushed restaurant like the first drops of rain before a storm. Summertime and the living is easy. The words were bittersweet given her circumstances. An ironic commentary on the chasm between the world of the song and the world she inhabited. But then something happened, something she hadn't anticipated. The muscle memory of performance took over. The years of training, the countless hours in practice rooms and on stages. Her voice opened up, gained power and depth, soaring through the melody with a richness that seemed impossible to come from such a small frame. The song transformed in her throat, became less about the lyrics and more about the emotion beneath them. About longing and loss and a fierce burning hope that refused to be extinguished. She sang about summer but made it feel like winter giving way to spring, sang about ease but infused it with the knowledge of struggle, sang about jumping and spreading your wings with the desperate faith of someone who'd had their wings clipped but remembered what it was like to fly. The restaurant was utterly silent. Even the kitchen noise had ceased, the clattering of plates and murmur of chef's instructions fading away as if the entire building had stopped to listen. Maya's eyes remained closed, lost in the music, in the one place where she still felt like herself, where the weight of the world couldn't quite reach her. When she reached the bridge, her voice climbed higher, a crystalline note that seemed to hang in the air, suspended in time, perfect and heartbreaking. At Eleanor Ashford's table, something extraordinary was happening. The elderly billionaire had gone completely still, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. Her face had drained of color, her eyes wide and fixed on Maya with an intensity that bordered on shock. Her hand began to tremble and the wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the table with a crash that shattered the spell of the music. Maya's eyes flew open, the song dying in her throat. Eleanor Ashford was half standing, half falling, one hand clutching at her chest, the other reaching out toward Maya as if trying to grasp something just beyond reach. Her lips moved, forming a word that Maya couldn't quite hear, a name that seemed dragged from the depths of memory and pain. Then Eleanor's legs buckled, and she collapsed, her chair crashing backward as she fell. The restaurant erupted into chaos. Samuel rushed forward, his phone already out, calling for an ambulance. Other diners jumped up, some trying to help, others simply standing frozen in shock. Marcus Crane, forgotten in his corner booth, watched the scene with an expression of profound irritation, as if Eleanor's medical emergency was a personal inconvenience designed to ruin his evening's entertainment. Maya found herself moving without conscious thought, pushing through the small crowd that had formed around Eleanor. The elderly woman was conscious but barely, her breathing shallow and rapid, her skin ashen. Up close, Maya could see that Eleanor's eyes were fixed on her face with desperate recognition, with something that looked like grief and wonder and terror all mixed together. "Please," Eleanor whispered, her voice thin as paper, her hand reaching up to grasp Maya's wrist with surprising strength. "Your voice. Who taught you? Who taught you to sing like that?" The question was bizarre under the circumstance, but there was such urgency in Eleanor's grip, such raw need in her eyes, that Maya answered automatically. "My grandmother," she said. "She raised me until I was 12. She was a singer, too, back in her day." "What was her name?" Eleanor demanded, her voice gaining a fractional amount of strength, her eyes boring into Maya's with laser focus. "Tell me her name, child." "Lucia," Maya said, confused and frightened by the intensity of the old woman's reaction. "Lucia Chun. She died when I was 12. I never knew much about her life before she came to America. She didn't like to talk about the past." Eleanor's eyes closed and a single tear traced down her papery cheek. She whispered, "Oh God, it's her. After all these years, it's her." She opened her eyes again and they were swimming with tears and something else, something that looked like the breaking open of a wound that had never properly healed. "Your voice," she said to Maya. "It's identical. The timbre, the phrasing, the way you breathe between notes. It's like hearing a ghost, like stepping back 60 years. The ambulance arrived, the paramedics efficient and professional, checking vital signs and asking questions that Eleanor answered in a distracted monotone, never taking her eyes off Maya. Her blood pressure was dangerously high, her heart rate erratic. They wanted to transport her immediately to the hospital, but Eleanor refused, her voice gaining the steel that had made her a legend in the business world. "I'm not going anywhere until I have this girl's contact information," she declared. "I will not lose her the way I lost Lucia." Samuel, ever professional despite the chaos, provided a Belvedere business card and wrote Maya's cell phone number on the back at Eleanor's insistence. The old woman clutched it like a lifeline as the paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher. "Find me," she called to Maya as they wheeled her toward the exit. "Come see me at Presbyterian Hospital. There are things you need to know, things about your grandmother, about who she really was." Maya stood in the middle of the dining room, her heart pounding, her mind reeling from the surreal turn the evening had taken. Around her, the Belvedere was slowly returning to normal, diners resettling into their seats, servers beginning to clean up the broken glass and spilled wine from Eleanor's table. And then she remembered Marcus Crane. The offer, $1 million for a song. She turned to look at his booth, but it was empty. He had slipped out at some point during the chaos, disappeared without paying his bill, without acknowledging the spectacle he'd orchestrated. There would be no $1 million. Of course there wouldn't be. It had never been a real offer. It had been a game, a cruel joke designed to humiliate her, to put her in her place, to remind her that people like her existed for the entertainment of people like him. The humiliation settled over Maya like a second skin, cold and suffocating. She stood in the center of the dining room, aware that every eye was still on her, that she'd become a spectacle, a moment of drama that these wealthy diners would recount to their friends over brunch tomorrow. "Did you hear what happened at the Belvedere? A server actually sang for $1 million, can you imagine?" And then that poor Ashford woman collapsed. Quite the evening. She could already hear their voices, amused and detached, turning her desperation into dinner party anecdote. Samuel approached her, his face a mask of professional concern that didn't quite hide his disapproval. "Maya, perhaps you should take the rest of the evening off," he said quietly. "Go home. We'll discuss this situation tomorrow." The words were gentle, but Maya understood their real meaning. She'd crossed a line, had participated in a scene that violated the Belvedere's carefully cultivated atmosphere of refined discretion. It didn't matter that Marcus Crane had forced the situation, that she'd been backed into an impossible corner. What mattered was that she'd made a spectacle of herself, had reminded the clientele that the servers were people with their own dramas and desperations, and that was unforgivable in a place like this. She nodded mutely, untied her apron with numb fingers, and retreated to the back room where the staff kept their belongings. Jennifer, the senior server who dealt with Marcus earlier, was there, leaning against the lockers with her arms crossed. "That was quite a show," she said, her tone neutral, impossible to read. Maya couldn't tell if it was sympathy or judgment. She didn't have the energy to figure it out. She grabbed her coat and her bag, desperate to escape, to be anywhere but here. The November air hit her like a slap when she stepped out the employee entrance into the alley behind the restaurant. It was nearly 10 at night, and the city hummed with its usual nocturnal energy. Sirens in the distance, the rumble of the subway beneath her feet, voices and laughter spilling out of bars and restaurants. Maya stood there for a moment, letting the cold seep into her bones, grounding her in physical sensation when everything else felt surreal and untethered. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, 3 missed calls from the hospital. Her heart dropped into her stomach, that familiar spike of adrenaline and dread that had become her constant companion since her mother's diagnosis. She called back with shaking fingers, was transferred twice, and finally connected with the night nurse on her mother's floor. "Ms. Chun," the nurse said, her voice professionally kind, "your mother's had a difficult evening. Her pain levels have increased significantly. The doctor wants to discuss adjusting her medication, possibly moving to a stronger protocol. Can you come in tonight?" Maya closed her eyes, leaned back against the brick wall of the alley. Of course this day would end like this. "I'll be there in 40 minutes, she said, her voice hollow. She ended the call and stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on her, threatening to crush her. The $1 million that never was. Her job that was almost certainly over. Her mother dying by inches in a sterile room. Eleanor Ashford's inexplicable recognition of her voice. Her grandmother's name spoken with such weight and sorrow. It was too much. It was all too much. But standing in an alley feeling sorry for herself wouldn't change anything. It never did. Maya pushed off the wall and started walking toward the subway station. Her steps automatic, her mind already compartmentalizing, pushing the evening's humiliation into a box she could deal with later. When her mother was settled, when she had the luxury of processing her own feeling. That was the skill she'd developed over the past 8 months, the ability to function on autopilot, to keep moving forward when everything in her wanted to simply stop. To sit down and refuse to get up until the universe decided to be kind for once. The hospital was a 30-minute subway ride and a 10-minute walk, and Maya made the journey in a fog, barely aware of her surrounding. The oncology ward had become her second home, familiar in all the wrong ways. She knew which elevators were fastest, which nurses were kind, and which were simply efficient, where the vending machines were and which ones actually worked. She knew the smell, antiseptic and decay poorly masked by industrial cleaning products, and the cloying scent of cafeteria food. She knew the sounds, the beeping of monitors, and the quiet weeping behind closed doors, and the footsteps of doctors making their rounds. Harbingers of good news or bad, though mostly bad. Her mother, Catherine Chun, was awake when Maya entered the room, propped up on pillows that seemed to emphasize how small she'd become, how the cancer had whittled her down to a fragile collection of bones and translucent skin, but her eyes were still bright, still fierce with the determination that had carried them through Maya's father's abandonment when she was 2, through years of working double shifts as a paralegal to keep them fed and housed, through every hardship life had thrown at them. Catherine Chun was a fighter. She just happened to be fighting a battle that medical science said she couldn't win. "Mom," Maya said softly, pulling a chair close to the bed and taking her mother's hand. "The nurse said your pain levels increased." Catherine smiled weakly. "That's a polite way of saying I feel like I'm being torn apart from the inside. But don't worry, sweetheart. They're giving me the good drugs now. I'm floating on a cloud of pharmaceutical intervention." Her attempt at humor was undercut by the grimace of pain that crossed her face. By the way, her hand tightened almost involuntarily on Maya's. Dr. Reeves came in a few minutes later, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and the perpetually exhausted look of someone who'd chosen a specialty that dealt primarily in losing battles. She explained the new medication protocol. Stronger opioids that would manage the pain but would also make Catherine increasingly drowsy, less present. "We're focusing on comfort now," she said gently. Maya understood what she wasn't saying. They were giving up on treatment. They were transitioning to palliative care, to managing symptoms rather than fighting the disease. Her mother had maybe weeks left, maybe a month if they were lucky, though. Lucky seemed like the wrong word for a prolonged death. After the doctor left, Maya sat in silence, still holding her mother's hand, watching the medication drip into her foreline, watching Catherine's face gradually relax as the pain receded, replaced by a chemical peace. "Mom," Maya said quietly, "did Grandma Lucia ever talk to you about her life before she came to America?" The question surprised her even as she asked it. She'd been thinking about Eleanor Ashford's reaction, about the certainty in the old woman's voice. It's her. After all these years, it's her. Catherine's eyes opened, focusing on Maya with effort. "Your grandmother? That's a random question. What brought that up?" "Just something that happened tonight at work," Maya said vaguely. "I realized I don't know much about her past. You were young when she died, only 12. She spoke very little about the old country." Catherine's voice was growing softer, the medication pulling her towards sleep. "What I know I learned from bits and pieces. Things she let slip. She was from a wealthy family in Hong Kong, very wealthy, old money. But something happened, some scandal or tragedy. She never spoke about it directly, but I got the sense she'd been disowned, cut off completely. She came to New York with nothing, couldn't even use her real family name." Maya leaned forward. "What was her family name? If Chun wasn't her real name." Catherine's brow furrowed with the effort of remembering through the haze of pain medication. "I don't know. She never told me. But I remember once when I was very young, before your father left, I found a photograph hidden in her things. It was her, younger, maybe in her 20s, wearing an evening gown and jewelry that looked expensive. She was standing on a stage and there were people in formal wear watching her. An audience. When I asked her about it, she took the photograph and destroyed it, burned it in the sink. She told me that person was dead, that the woman in the photograph no longer existed, and I must never ask about her again." The story sent chills down Maya's spine. "She was a singer," Maya said, "like me, like you. We all have her voice." "Yes," Catherine agreed, her eyes drifting closed. "We have her voice, and her sadness. She carried such sadness, Maya. Like she'd lost everything that mattered and spent the rest of her life trying to forget. She used to sing to you when you were a baby. Old songs in Cantonese that I didn't understand. You'd stop crying the moment she started singing. It was the only thing that could calm you." Catherine's breathing had deepened, evened out. She'd slipped into sleep, the medication finally overpowering the pain and the conversation. Maya sat there for a long time, holding her mother's hand, staring at nothing, her mind racing. A wealthy Hong Kong family, a scandal, a singer who'd been disowned and had come to America with nothing, reinventing herself, burning her past. And somehow, 60 years later, Eleanor Ashford, American billionaire and media mogul, had heard Maya sing and recognized that past had collapsed from the shock of it. The connections were there. Gossamer thin but undeniable. Eleanor had known her grandmother, had known her well enough that hearing a voice identical to Lucia's had physically overwhelmed her. What had happened between them? What was the story that neither woman had been willing to tell? That Lucia had taken to her grave and Eleanor had buried for 6 decades. Maya's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Eleanor Ashford. Samuel gave me your contact information. I apologize for my dramatic exit this evening, but I need to speak with you urgently. Please come see me at Presbyterian Hospital, room 812, tomorrow as early as you can manage. What I have to tell you about your grandmother will change everything you think you know about your family and about mine." The text felt ominous, weighted with significance that Maya couldn't quite parse. She looked at her sleeping mother, at the monitors tracking her failing systems, at the 4 delivering chemicals that could delay but not prevent the inevitable. Tomorrow she would lose her job. Tomorrow the collection agencies would call again. Tomorrow her mother would be one day closer to death. But tomorrow she would also learn the truth about Lucia Chun, about the woman who'd raised her and loved her and had carried secrets so profound she'd literally destroyed evidence of her past life to keep them buried. Maya stood, kissed her mother's forehead, and left the hospital room. The nurse at the station told her Catherine would likely sleep through the night, that she should go home and get rest herself. Good advice that Maya knew she wouldn't follow. Instead, she walked through the antiseptic corridors, took the elevator down, and found herself standing in the lobby, staring at the directory on the wall. Presbyterian Hospital, room 812. Eleanor Ashford was here, in this same building, just a few floors away, holding answers to questions Maya hadn't known to ask. The rational part of Maya's mind told her to wait until morning, to go home, to process the evening's chaos before diving into whatever revelations Eleanor Ashford was offering. But rationality had never been Maya's strong suit when it came to unanswered questions. And tonight, running on adrenaline and desperation, the pull toward room 812 was magnetic and undeniable. She found herself pressing the elevator button, watching the numbers climb, her heart rate increasing with each floor. The cardiac care unit was quieter than the oncology ward, the lights dimmed for night. Only the central nurses' station brightly lit, a small island of activity in the subdued hallway. Maya approached the desk where a young nurse with dark circles under her eyes was reviewing charts. "Excuse me," Maya said softly. "I'm here to see Eleanor Ashford. Room 812. She asked me to visit." The nurse looked up, her expression skeptical. "It's nearly 11 at night. Visiting hours ended at 9. Mrs. Ashford should be resting." But even as she said it, another voice called out from down the hall, strong and imperious despite its age. "Is that her? Is that the girl with Lucia's voice? Let her in immediately." The nurse sighed, the exasperation of someone whose authority was being overridden by a difficult patient. "She's awake, obviously. Room 812 down the hall on the left. Don't stay long. She needs rest even if she won't admit it." Maya walked down the corridor, her footsteps muffled by industrial carpet, her mouth dry with anticipation and fear. Eleanor Ashford's room was larger than her mother's. A private suite with windows overlooking the city lights, furnished with touches that suggested money and influence. A comfortable chair instead of plastic, real art on the walls instead of generic prints. Eleanor herself was sitting up in bed, still wearing her jewelry, though she'd been changed into a hospital gown, an incongruous combination that somehow seemed fitting. She looked diminished by her collapse, older and more fragile, but her eyes were bright and focused, locked on Maya with the intensity of someone who'd been waiting for this moment for longer than she cared to admit. "Close the door," Eleanor commanded, and Maya obeyed automatically. The habit of following instructions from wealthy patrons too ingrained to resist. "Come here, child. Let me look at you properly." Maya approached the bed, feeling exposed under Eleanor's scrutiny. The old woman reached out a hand, not touching, just hovering near Maya's face as if she could feel the contours of her features through the air. "She had Lucia's eyes too," Eleanor murmured. "That same shape, that same intensity. But the rest is different. You must favor your father's side." "I wouldn't know," Maya said quietly. "He left when I was 2. I don't remember him." Eleanor's expression softened fractionally. Of course, Lucia always did choose the wrong men. Brilliant woman, utterly terrible judgment when it came to romance. She gestured to the chair beside the bed. "Sit. This'll take some time, and I'm old and tired, and I may not get another chance to tell this story. The doctors think I had a cardiac event brought on by stress. They're not entirely wrong, though what they don't understand is that some stresses are 60 years in the making." Maya sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, waiting. Eleanor took a breath, her gaze drifting toward the window, toward the city lights that seemed to mirror the stars. "Your grandmother, Lucia Chun, wasn't born Lucia Chun. That name was an invention. A new identity she created when she came to New York in 1963. Her real name was Lucia Lin, and she was born into one of the wealthiest families in Hong Kong, the Lin shipping dynasty. Her father owned half the cargo routes in Southeast Asia. Her mother was descended from Qing dynasty aristocracy. Lucia was raised in a world of obscene privilege, educated by private tutors, fluent in 5 languages by the time she was 15. Maya felt like she was hearing about a stranger. The grandmother she'd known had lived in a small rent-controlled apartment in Chinatown, had worked as a seamstress, had clipped coupons and saved pennies and never, not once, suggested she'd come from anything other than ordinary working-class poverty. But she was also a singer, Eleanor. That was her rebellion, her passion. The Lin family didn't approve of their daughter performing, of being seen on stage like common entertainment. It wasn't dignified. It wasn't proper for a woman of her standing. But Lucia was stubborn. She sang in private clubs, in underground venues, using a stage name to protect her family's reputation, and she was extraordinary. Her voice could silence a room, could make grown men weep, could make you feel like she was singing directly to your soul. Eleanor paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, tinged with old grief. I met her in 1961. I was in Hong Kong on business, still building my media empire, looking for opportunities in the Asian market. A business associate took me to a club, a sophisticated place where the wealthy went to pretend they were bohemian, and there she was on a small stage wearing a simple black dress, singing in Cantonese and English, switching between languages with the ease of someone who belonged to no single culture, and all of them at once. I'd never heard anything like her. I'd never heard anyone like her. After her set, I introduced myself. We talked until dawn. She was 23. I was 34, recently divorced, cynical about love and life and the possibility of genuine connection. She made me believe in magic again. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Maya's mind raced, connecting pieces she hadn't known existed. You were in love with her, she said quietly. Eleanor's smile was sad and ancient. I was in love with her. She was in love with me. For 2 years, we carried on a relationship that had to be kept absolutely secret. It was 1961. 2 women together, one Asian, one American, both from worlds that would have destroyed us if they knew. We were careful, discreet. We met in borrowed apartments and hotel rooms. We built a whole universe in the shadows, a place where the outside world couldn't touch us. She looked directly at Maya, her eyes fierce. Don't mistake me, it wasn't perfect. We fought. We were both strong-willed, both used to get in our way, but it was real. It was the most real thing I've ever experienced in a life full of calculated transactions and strategic relationships. So what happened? Maya asked. Though she could already feel the shape of the tragedy, could sense the ending coming like a wave building on the horizon. Eleanor's face hardened. Her family found out. I don't know who told them, some servant who saw something, some society gossip who put pieces together. In 1963, they gave her an ultimatum. Marry the man they'd chosen for her. A business connection that would strengthen the family's shipping interest, or be disowned completely. Cut off from the family fortune, from the family name, from everything she'd ever known. They gave her 1 week to decide. And she refused, Maya said, feeling a surge of pride for a grandmother she'd never truly known. She chose you? Eleanor shook her head, and the gesture was full of regret and bitter understanding. No, child, she chose neither of us. She ran. She took what little money she had hidden away, got on a plane to New York, and disappeared. She didn't tell me she was leaving, didn't say goodbye. I woke up one morning to find her gone. Nothing left but a note that said she couldn't be what either of us needed her to be. She couldn't be the dutiful daughter. She couldn't be my lover in a world that would destroy us for it. She had to become someone else entirely. The betrayal in Eleanor's voice was still fresh after 60 years, the wound still raw. I searched for her, Eleanor continued. I used every resource at my disposal, hired private investigators, called in favors from contacts in New York, but she'd vanished completely. Changed her name, disappeared into the immigrant communities where I had no connections, no way to reach her. I looked for 2 years. Then my business demanded my attention. I told myself she'd made her choice, that I needed to move on. I buried myself in work, built my empire bigger and broader, married twice more out of loneliness and companionship. Never love again. She paused, her hand trembling slightly. I stopped looking, but I never stopped listening. What do you mean? Maya asked. Eleanor smiled, a small, secret expression. I own radio stations, dear. Television networks. I spent the next decades with part of my attention always attuned to voices, to the possibility that I might hear her again, that she might surface somewhere, singing in some small club or church center. I had people monitoring, casual searches, nothing obsessive, just an awareness, but she never appeared, not once. She'd given up singing professionally, I assumed, or maybe she'd died. There was no way to know. Until tonight, until I heard you. Maya felt tears prickling her eyes. She did give up singing professionally. She worked as a seamstress. She sang to me, to my mother, but only at home, only in private. She died when I was 12, lung cancer. I didn't know, Eleanor whispered. I didn't know she was gone. There was a long silence, broken only by the beep of the heart monitor beside Eleanor's bed. Then Eleanor seemed to gather herself to pull back from the edge of grief. Your mother, Catherine. Is she Lucia's daughter or her granddaughter? My mother, Maya confirmed. Lucia raised her. My mom never knew her own father, and she never talked about him. Eleanor nodded slowly. That makes sense. Lucia was pregnant when she left Hong Kong. I didn't know. She didn't tell me. But looking back, certain things she said in those last few weeks make sense now. She was scared, talking about responsibilities and futures and difficult choices. I thought she meant the marriage her family was forcing forcing on her. I didn't realize she was carrying a child. My mother, Maya said quietly. Eleanor reached out and took Maya's hand, her grip surprisingly strong, which means you are Lucia's granddaughter. You carry her voice, her gift, her legacy, and whether you know it or not, you carry a claim that could change everything. Maya frowned, confused. A claim to what? Eleanor's smile was sharp, calculating, the expression of someone who'd spent a lifetime in boardrooms and negotiations. The Lin family fortune. Child. Pouchet was the eldest daughter. By traditional inheritance laws and the family's private trust documents, she had a claim to a substantial portion of the estate. When she vanished, was declared legally dead in 1970, that claim should have passed to her heirs. To your mother. To you. Maya stared at her, the words not quite making sense. I don't understand. What are you saying? Eleanor's expression was a mixture of satisfaction and something darker, something that looked like the opening move in a long-deferred chess game. I'm saying that the Lin family fortune, which has grown considerably over the past 6 decades, is partially yours by right of inheritance. The Lin shipping dynasty is now worth approximately $8 billion. Lucia's share, had she not been disinherited, would have been at least 20%. That's $1.6 billion that should have passed to her heirs. To your mother, to you. The number was so absurd that Maya actually laughed, a short, sharp sound that bordered on hysteria. That's insane. Even if that were true, which I have no reason to believe it is, they disowned her. She was cut off. She ran away. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes glinting with the predatory intelligence that had built a media empire. Disowned, yes, but never formally legally disinherited. The Lin family pride wouldn't allow them to publicly acknowledge the scandal. They let everyone believe Lucia had died in an accident, a tragic drowning during a yacht party. Very sad, very convenient. But they never went through the legal process of removing her from the trust documents, never officially declared her dead and redistributed her share. It remained in limbo, unclaimed, technically still held in her name under the management of her younger brother, who took control of the company. And you know this how? Maya asked, her skepticism warring with a desperate hope she was afraid to acknowledge. Because I've been keeping tabs on the Lin family for 60 years, Eleanor said bluntly. My media empire has significant interests in Asia. I've maintained connections, paid attention to the family's business dealings, their legal structures, their trusts and holding. I told myself it was simple business intelligence, staying informed about potential competitors and partners. But the truth is, I was watching them because they were Lucia's family, because it was the only connection I had left to her. And over the years, I noticed something. The ownership structure of Lin Enterprises has never been fully consolidated. There's always been this phantom share, this unclaimed portion that legally still belongs to Lucia Lin despite her presumed death. Maya's mind was racing, trying to process information that seemed to belong to someone else's life, some other reality where waitresses who sang for cruel millionaires discovered they were secret heirs to fortunes. This is too much, she said, shaking her head. Even if what you're saying is true, why are you telling? What do you want? Eleanor settled back against her pillows, looking suddenly tired, the evening's excitement and emotion catching up with her. What do I want? That's a complicated question. Revenge, perhaps? Justice? Certainly. I want the family that destroyed Lucia's life to answer for what they did. I want them to face the daughter they thought they'd erased, the legacy they tried to bury. And perhaps, in some small way, I wanted to finish what Lucia and I started, to claim what was stolen from her, even if she's not here to see it. She reached over to the bedside table with effort, retrieved a business card, and pressed it into Maya's hand. That's my personal attorney. Her name is Diane Reeves, and she's the best in the business. Call her tomorrow morning. She'll need documentation, your grandmother's death certificate, your mother's birth certificate, proof of lineage. It won't be easy. The Lin family will fight this with everything they have. The law is on your side, and with my resources backing you, you have a chance. A real chance. Maya looked at the card, the embossed letters blurring slightly in her vision. Why would you do this? Why would you help me? We're strangers. Eleanor's smile was sad. Because you're not a stranger. You're Lucia's legacy, the part of her that survived. And because I failed her 60 years ago, I let her run. I didn't fight for her. I accepted her leaving as inevitable, as the price we both had to pay for the impossible nature of what we had. I won't make that mistake again. I'm 87 years old, Maya. I don't have much time left. Let me do this one thing right. Maya left Eleanor's room 40 minutes later, her head spinning, the business card clutched in her hand like a talisman or a bomb, something with the power to transform everything or destroy what little stability she had left. The city outside the hospital was quieter now, the streets emptying as midnight approached. She walked without conscious destination, her feet carrying her through neighborhoods she barely registered. Her mind caught in the impossible space between her life as it was and the life Eleanor Ashford had just offered her. $1.6 billion. The number was meaningless, too large to conceptualize, existing in a realm of abstraction that had nothing to do with medical bills and collection notices and the constant calculation of whether she could afford dinner or needed to skip it to make rent. But beneath the absurdity, beneath the impossibility, a small voice in her head whispered, what if? What if it was true? What if her grandmother really had been an heiress who'd walked away from everything? What if Maya's entire understanding of her family history was wrong, built on the necessary fictions Lucia had created to protect herself and her daughter? What if there was a way to save her mother, to give Catherine the treatment she needed, the time she deserved? Maya found herself back at her apartment building, a 5-story walk-up in a neighborhood that was gentrifying around her, driving rents up and long-time residents out. She climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, let herself into the tiny studio she and her mother had shared before Catherine's hospital, and stood in the small space feeling like an intruder in her own life. Everything was exactly as she'd left it that morning, but nothing was the same. She was different, or the world was different, or both. She made tea that she didn't drink, sat on the edge of her narrow bed and pulled out her phone. The smart thing would be to sleep, to let exhaustion claim her, to deal with all of this tomorrow when she wasn't running on fumes and shock. But Maya had never been particularly good at doing the smart thing. She opened her browser and searched for Lin Enterprises Hong Kong. Pages of results flooded her screen. Business articles, financial reports, society photographs from charity galas and corporate events. The current CEO was Richard Lin, Lucia's younger brother, 81 years old, still firmly in control of the family empire. There were photos of him, stern-faced and distinguished, standing beside ships and at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Maya studied his face, looking for some resemblance to her grandmother, some echo of family. She couldn't find it. But then, the grandmother she'd known had been old and worn down by life, her face marked by struggle and secrets. The young woman in the single photograph her mother had described, the one Lucia had burned, might have looked very different. She searched deeper, finding archived articles from the early 1960s. There, buried in the society pages of an old Hong Kong newspaper that had been digitized, was a brief mention. Miss Lucia Lin, eldest daughter of shipping magnate Thomas Lin, remains in seclusion following an unspecified illness. The family requests privacy during this difficult time. The date was June 1963. 2 months later, another article. The Lin family mourns the tragic loss of Lucia Lin, who drowned in a boating accident off the coast of Lantau Island. A private service will be held. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the Hong Kong Children's Hospital. Drowned, dead at 25. Except she hadn't been dead. She'd been on a plane to New York, pregnant and terrified, burning her old life behind her with the same thoroughness she'd later burned that photograph. Maya felt a surge of admiration for her grandmother's courage, for the sheer audacity of disappearing so completely that even her family believed the fiction of her death. But there was something else in those articles, something that nagged at Maya: the private service, the request for donations instead of flowers, the complete absence of detail about the accident itself. It read less like a genuine tragedy and more like a cover story, hastily constructed and deliberately vague. The Lin family had known Lucia wasn't dead. They'd created the drowning story to save face, to avoid the scandal of a daughter who defied them and vanished, which meant Eleanor was right. They'd never legally dealt with Lucia's share of the inheritance because doing so would have required admitting she was alive, admitting they didn't know where she was, admitting they'd lost control of their own daughter. Maya's phone buzzed with a text. It was nearly 2 in the morning. The message was from an unknown number, but the content made her blood run cold. Heard you made quite a scene at the Belvedere tonight. Singing for your supper like a good little servant. Don't get any ideas above your station. People who forget their place tend to have unfortunate accidents. Consider this a friendly warning. Marcus Crane. She stared at the message, reading it 3 times, her initial shock giving way to anger and then something harder, something that felt like resolve crystallizing in her chest. He was threatening her. The man who'd humiliated her, who'd made a mockery of her desperation, was now threatening her because what? Because she'd actually sung? Because Eleanor Ashford had recognized something in her that Marcus couldn't understand or control? She screenshot the message and saved it. Then she opened her email and composed a message to Diane Reeves, Eleanor's attorney, attaching the screenshot along with a brief explanation of the evening's events and Eleanor's revelations about her grandmother. If she was going to do this, if she was going to step into the impossible story Eleanor had laid out, she needed to be smart about it. She needed documentation, she needed protection, and she needed to understand exactly what she was walking. The email sent with a soft whoosh, and Maya felt the point of no return pass. She'd set something in motion that couldn't be stopped, had stepped onto a path that would either save her mother or destroy what little security Maya had managed to build in her precarious life. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with dreams. She dreamed of her grandmother, young and beautiful, standing on a stage in a black dress, singing to a room full of strangers. But as the dream shifted, the strangers became threatening, their faces twisted with anger and disapproval, and Lucia's voice grew louder, more desperate, until she was screaming rather than singing. And then she was drowning, pulled under dark water that filled her mouth and lung. Maya woke with a gasp, her heart racing, dawn light filtering through her thin curtains. Her phone showed 7 missed calls and a dozen texts. 3 were from the Belvedere, from Samuel. "We need to talk about your employment status. Please call me as soon as possible." 2 were from Jennifer, the senior server. "Girl, what did you get yourself into? People are talking. The restaurant is going crazy. Be careful. One was from an unknown number that she opened with trepidation. It was from Diane Reeves. Miss Chun, I received your email. Eleanor briefed me last night about your situation. I've begun preliminary research into the Lin family trust documents. This is complex, but not impossible. Can you come to my office this morning at 10? We have much to discuss in very little time. The Lin family has ears everywhere. If they learn about this claim before we're ready to file, they'll move to block us. Attached, you'll find a list of documents. I'll come alone and tell no one where you're going. Maya sat up in bed, her body aching from exhaustion and stress, and looked around her tiny apartment. In a few hours, she would walk into a lawyer's office and make a claim to a fortune that seemed like fantasy. She would likely lose her job. She would definitely make powerful enemies. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to ignore all of this, to let Eleanor Ashford's revelations remain just that, revelations without action, a glimpse into an impossible alternate life. But Maya thought of her mother, dying in a hospital bed, transitioning to comfort care because they couldn't afford anything else. She thought of her grandmother who'd given up everything rather than live a lie, who'd had the courage to become someone entirely new rather than accept the cage her family had built for her. And she thought of Marcus Crane's threatening text, the casual cruelty of a man who believed he could humiliate people without consequence. Maya showered, dressed in the only professional outfit she owned, a simple black suit she'd bought secondhand for her conservatory auditions years ago, and left her apartment at 8:30. She stopped first at the hospital, checking on her mother, who was still sleeping peacefully under the influence of the new medication protocol. The nurse told her Catherine's vitals were stable, that the pain seemed to be under control, that these might be good days before the inevitable decline accelerated. Maya kissed her mother's forehead, whispered that she loved her, and left before Catherine could wake and ask where she was going. Some lies were necessary, protective. This felt like one of them. Diane Reeves' office was in Midtown, in one of those steel and glass towers that reached toward the sky with the arrogant confidence of institutions that had never known failure. The lobby was all marble and chrome, security guards at the desk checking IDs and making calls to confirm appointments. Maya felt acutely out of place, aware of her second-hand suit, her worn shoes, the way she didn't belong in spaces like this. But she gave her name to the guard, was issued a visitor's badge, and directed to the 43rd floor. The elevator ride up felt like ascending into another world, one where people spoke in millions instead of dollars, where power was traded like currency and laws were things you navigated rather than obeyed. Diane Reeves' office suite took up half the floor. All glass walls and expensive minimalist furniture and the quiet hum of serious money being seriously managed. A receptionist who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine greeted Maya with professional warmth and escorted her to a conference room that had views of the city that made Maya dizzy. Diane herself entered moments later. A woman in her mid-50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Maya's entire wardrobe. But her handshake was firm, and her eyes were kind, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who'd won more battles than she'd lost. Miss Chun, thank you for coming, Diane said, gesturing to a chair at the conference table. Eleanor called me at 6 this morning to emphasize the urgency of this matter. I've been researched that. What we're dealing with is complex but not unprecedented. Before we go further, I need to establish the facts. She opened a leather portfolio and pulled out a legal pad covered in neat handwriting. Your grandmother, Lucia Lin, was born in Hong Kong in 1938 to Thomas and Margaret Lin. She was the eldest of 3 children with 2 younger brothers, Richard and James. The Lin family fortune was built on shipping but has since diversified into real estate, technology, and finance. The current estimated worth is approximately $8 billion. Controlled primarily by Richard Lin, who is now 81. Maya nodded, her throat tight. That matches what Eleanor told me. Good, Diane said. Now here's where it gets interesting. In 1958, when Thomas Lin was dying of cancer, he established a family trust to protect the fortune from estate taxes and to ensure it stayed within the family. The trust was divided into shares with specific percentages allocated to each child. Lucia, as the eldest, received 20%. Richard received 40% as the heir who would run the company. James received 20%. The remaining 20% was held in reserve for future generations, grandchildren, and beyond. She pulled out a document, old and yellowed, with official seals and signatures. This is a copy of the original trust document. I have contacts in Hong Kong who were able to access the archived records. It clearly lists Lucia Lin as a beneficiary with a 20% share. So Eleanor was right, Maya said, hardly believing it. She's always right, Diane said with a slight smile. Question is whether that share still legally belongs to Lucia's heirs, or whether the family's fiction of her death terminated her claim. In most jurisdictions, a person declared dead even falsely loses legal standing until their living status is proven. However, Hong Kong law in 1963 required specific legal proceedings to declare someone dead and redistribute their assets. The Lin family never pursued those proceedings because doing so would have revealed their lie. They simply managed Lucia's share as if it were Richard's, consolidating control without proper legal authority. That seems like fraud, Maya said. It is fraud, Diane agreed, but it's fraud that's been ongoing for 60 years. which complicates matters. Statute of limitations, the difficulty of proving intent, the sheer passage of time, all of it works in their favor. However, we have one significant advantage. You are a direct heir making a claim to property that was never legally transferred. In trust law, that's called a continuing trespass. There's no statute of limitations on recovering property that was never properly conveyed away from its rightful owner. She leaned forward, her expression serious. Here's what I need from you. Documentation proving your lineage. Your mother's birth certificate listing Lucia as her mother. Your grandmother's death certificate. Your own birth certificate. Any documents Lucia might have saved. Old passports, immigration papers, anything that proves she was Lucia Lin from Hong Kong, not just Lucia Chun from Chinatown. Maya felt a sinking in her stomach. My grandmother destroyed everything from her past. My mother told me she burned a photograph that she refused to talk about her life before America. I don't know if any documents exist. Diane's expression didn't change, but Maya could see the calculation behind her eyes. Then we'll need to establish identity through DNA. The Lin family still exists, still has living members. If we can compel them to submit to genetic testing, we can prove your relationship to Thomas Lin through your shared ancestry. It's more expensive, more time-consuming, but it's doable. The problem is, to compel that testing, we need to file a formal claim, which means tipping our hand before we're fully prepared. What happens when we file the claim? Maya asked. War, Diane said bluntly. The Lin family will mobilize every legal resource they have. They'll challenge your identity, challenge the validity of the trust document, challenge the jurisdiction of the courts. They'll drag this out for years if they can, hoping you'll run out of money and patience before they run out of lawyers. They'll also, and I want you to understand this clearly, investigate you thoroughly. Your finances, your history, your relationships, anything they can use to discredit you or intimidate you into withdrawing the claim. She paused. Eleanor is prepared to fund this fight. She has the resources and, frankly, the personal motivation to see it through. But I need to know if you're prepared for what this will cost you personally. Not in money, but in privacy, in peace, in the ability to live a normal life while this plays out. Maya thought of Marcus Crane's threatening text. I don't think I have a normal life to protect. I sang for $1 million that never existed. Probably going to be fired from my job. My mother is dying and I can't afford the treatment that might give her more time. What exactly do I have to lose? Everything, Diane said quietly. Your safety, your anonymity, your freedom to walk down the street without being recognized or harassed. The Lin family has connections in both Hong Kong and New York. They have relationships with very powerful, very ruthless people. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to ensure you understand the stakes. She pulled out another document, this one crisp and new. This is a representation agreement. If you sign it, I will take your case on contingency, meaning I don't get paid unless we win. Eleanor has agreed to cover all expenses, investigation costs, filing fees, everything. If we succeed, my firm takes 30% of any settlement or judgment. You and your mother receive the remaining 70%. If we lose, you owe nothing. Maya picked up the pen Diane offered, her hands steady despite the trembling she felt inside. Before I sign this, I need to know something. Do you believe we can win? Diane met her eyes, her expression unreadable. I believe you have a legitimate claim to a fortune that was stolen from your family. I believe the law, properly applied, is on your side. I believe Eleanor Ashford has the resources and determination to see this through. But do I believe we'll win? She paused, considering. I believe we have a 40% chance of succeeding in court and a 60% chance of forcing a settlement. The Lin family will want to avoid the publicity of a trial, the exposure of their decades-long fraud. They'll offer you money to go away, significantly less than what you're owed, but still life-changing amounts. The question is whether you're willing to accept a settlement or if you want to fight for the full amount, knowing that fighting means years of your life consumed by this battle. Maya thought about that. 40% chance of winning, 60% chance of a settlement. Both outcomes seemed better than the 100% chance of watching her mother die because they couldn't afford treatment. She signed the document, her signature a declaration of war against a family she'd never known existed until yesterday. Diane witnessed the signature, countersigned herself, and placed the document in her portfolio with a sense of finality. Welcome to the fight, Ms. Chun. Now let's talk strategy. First, we need to move quickly before the Lin family realizes what's coming. I have investigators in Hong Kong already working to gather additional documentation, interviewing people who knew Lucia, finding any evidence we can use to establish her identity in your claim. Second, we need to protect you physically and legally. Pulled out another card. This is a security consultant. He's expensive, but Eleanor is covering. He'll assess your living situation, identify vulnerability, implement protection measures. Maya took the card, feeling the reality of the situation settling over her like a weight. You really think I'm in danger? I think you're making a claim against $8 billion being controlled by people who've already demonstrated they're willing to lie and commit fraud to maintain that control. Yes, I think you're in danger. Not necessarily physical violence, though, we can't rule it out, but harassment, intimidation, threats, all of that is likely. The text you received last night from Marcus Crane is just the beginning. She paused. Speaking of which, I want to address that situation separately. Marcus Crane publicly humiliated you, made a fraudulent offer, and is now threatening you. That's actionable. We can file suit against him for intentional infliction of emotional distress, fraud, and harassment. It won't win us much money, he'll argue it was all in jest, but it will put him on notice that you're not defenseless, that you have legal representation and resources backing you. Sometimes the best defense is a visible offense. File it, Maya said, surprised by the hardness in her own voice. He needs to understand that people have consequences. Diane smiled, a sharp, predatory expression. I like you, Ms. Chun. You have backbone. That's going to be essential for what's ahead. Now, one more thing before you go. Eleanor wants you to come to her estate this evening. She's being released from the hospital this afternoon and insists on meeting with you in person. She has something to show you, something she says will help your case. She was cryptic about the details, but knowing Eleanor, it's significant. She pulled out an address written on expensive stationery. 6 p.m. Her driver will pick you up from your apartment at 5:30. Dress casually. Eleanor hates pretension. Despite living in a mansion, Maya left Diane's office 2 hours later with a folder full of documents to sign, a list of materials to gather, and a sense of unreality that permeated everything. She was now officially challenging one of Asia's wealthiest families for a fortune. She had lawyers and security consultants and investigators working on her behalf. Eleanor Ashford, a woman she'd met 18 hours ago, was bankrolling a war against the family that had destroyed her grandmother's life. It was insane. It was terrifying. And yet, walking through the Manhattan streets in her second-hand suit, Maya felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of someone praying for a miracle, but the solid, determined hope of someone who'd decided to fight, who'd chosen action over acceptance. Her phone rang. It was Samuel from the Belvedere. She answered, knowing what was coming. Maya, he said, his voice tired and apologetic. I'm sorry, but I have to let you go. It's what happened last night, the scene with Mr. Crane. Mrs. Ashford's collapse, it's created a situation the management can't overlook. You're a good server, but the Belvedere requires discretion above all else, Dan. Maya stood on the corner of 5th Avenue and 42nd Street. The phone pressed to her ear and felt a strange sense of liberation rather than devastation. I understand, Samuel, she said quietly. Thank you for being kind about it. There was a pause on the other end of the line, as if Samuel had expected her to argue or plead. I'll mail your final check and any accrued vacation pay, he said, sounding confused by her calm acceptance. If you need a reference for another position, I can provide one, just not in fine dining. You understand? I understand, Maya repeated, and ended the call. She didn't understand. Not really. But it didn't matter anymore. The Belvedere, the world of serving expensive meals to people who valued discretion over decency, was behind her now. She had bigger concerns, larger battles to fight. She spent the afternoon at the hospital with her mother, who was awake and more lucid than she'd been in days. The new pain medication finding a balance between relief and awareness. They talked about small things, memories from when Maya was young, Catherine's own childhood with Lucia, the little moments that make up a life. Maya didn't mention Eleanor, didn't mention the Lynn family or trust documents or the war she'd just declared on people who had the power to destroy her. This time with her mother was too precious to contaminate with uncertainty and danger. Instead, she held Catherine's hand and listened to stories she'd heard a dozen times before, committing them to memory like sacred texts, knowing that the number of times she'd hear her mother's voice was finite and diminishing. At 5 o'clock, she kissed Catherine goodbye and left the hospital. A black sedan was waiting at the curb outside her apartment building when she arrived, exactly as Diane had promised. The driver was a middle-aged man with the bearing of someone who'd spent time in the military. Polite but watchful, the kind of person who noticed everything and forgot nothing. Miss Chun, he said, opening the rear door. Mrs. Ashford is looking forward to seeing you. The drive took them north out of the city, through neighborhoods that grew progressively more affluent, the buildings spreading out, the streets widening, trees becoming more abundant. They entered Westchester County, where the truly wealthy maintained estates that offered the illusion of rural peace while being close enough to Manhattan for convenience. Eleanor Ashford's home was less a house and more a compound, a stone mansion that looked like it had been transported from an English countryside, set on grounds that seemed to stretch for acres. Gardens, even in late autumn, maintained a manicured elegance, a fountain centered in the circular driveway. Staff moved about with the quiet efficiency of well-trained servants. Maya felt like she'd stepped through a portal into a different century, a world where wealth wasn't just money but tradition, legacy, the accumulated power of generations. The driver escorted her to the front door, where a woman in her 60s wearing a simple black dress greeted her with professional warmth. Miss Chun, Mrs. Kunisi, Ashford is expecting you in the conservatory. Please follow me. The interior of the house was overwhelming in its understated opulence. Art on the walls that Maya suspected was original and priceless. Furniture that looked antique but was clearly still in use. A staircase that curved upward with a grace that suggested it had been designed by someone who understood architecture as art. They walked through hallways, past rooms glimpsed through open doors, a library with floor-to-ceiling books, a dining room with a table that could seat 20, until finally they reached a glass-walled room at the back of the house that looked out over formal gardens now golden in the late afternoon light. Eleanor sat in a high-backed chair near a grand piano, dressed casually in slacks and a cashmere sweater, her jewelry minimal but clearly expensive. She looked better than she had in the hospital. Color returned to her cheeks, though she still appeared fragile, as if the previous night's collapse had aged her a decade. Maya, she said, her voice warm. "Thank you for coming. Sit, please." She gestured to a chair positioned near her own. "Did Diane explain what we're attempting?" "She did," Maya said, sitting. "And I've signed the representation agreement. I'm committed to this, whatever it takes." Eleanor smiled, a fierce expression of satisfaction. "Good, because what I'm about to show you will change everything. Will give us leverage that the Lin family can't dismiss or explain away." She reached beside her chair and lifted a leather box, old and worn, about the size of a shoebox. "This," she said, placing it on the small table between them, "contains the only physical evidence of Lucia's life before she reinvented herself. Things she sent me in 1964, a year after she arrived in New York. I received them with a letter explaining that she was safe, that she'd had a daughter, and that she could never see me again. It was her way of saying goodbye, of giving me closure, even as she was breaking both our hearts." She opened the box with hands that trembled slightly. Inside were letters, yellowed with age, written in elegant script, photographs, black and white images of a young woman who was undeniably Maya's grandmother, though younger and happier than Maya had ever seen her, and jewelry pieces that, even to Maya's untrained eye, looked valuable, old, significant. Eleanor lifted out one of the photographs. "This is Lucia at 22, performing at the Mandarin Club in Hong Kong. She was already famous in certain circles, though always using her stage name, Never Lin." The photograph showed a young woman in a qipao, the traditional Chinese dress, standing at a microphone, her posture confident, her expression serene. Maya stared at the image, seeing her own features reflected back at her across 6 decades. The same eyes, the same shape of the mouth, the genetic echo that bound them across time and death. "That's her," Maya whispered. "That's my grandmother." Eleanor nodded. "And this," she said, lifting a bracelet from the box, "is proof of her identity that no DNA test or document search could provide." She held up a piece of jewelry that was clearly antique, gold worked into an intricate pattern with jade stones set into the design. "Look at the clasp." Maya leaned closer. Engraved on the gold clasp in both English and Chinese characters was a name, Lucia Mei Ling Lin. Her full name, her real name, the identity she'd abandoned. "And here," Eleanor said, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a killing blow, "is the provenance." She pulled out a document, official-looking, with multiple seals and signatures. "This is the certificate of authenticity from the jeweler who created this bracelet in 1955. It was commissioned by Thomas Lin for his daughter Lucia's 17th birthday. The certificate lists the specifications, the materials, and most importantly, includes a photograph of the bracelet being presented to Lucia at her birthday celebration." She produced another photograph, this one showing a teenage Lucia accepting the bracelet from an older man who was clearly her father, surrounded by family and guests at what was obviously an elaborate party. "This proves she existed," Maya said, understanding the significance. "This proves Lucia Lin was a real person, not a story or a ghost. It proves her connection to the Lin family." "Exactly," Eleanor confirmed. "The bracelet alone might be dismissible, a piece of jewelry that changed hands, but the combination of the engraved name, the provenance documentation, the photograph showing her wearing it, creates an unbreakable chain of evidence. When combined with genetic testing linking you to the Lin family, this bracelet becomes irrefutable proof that your grandmother was Lucia Lin, that she survived past 1963, and that her share of the trust was never legally transferred." She placed the bracelet in Maya's hand. "This belongs to you now, as Lucia's heir. But more than that, it's a weapon." The Lin family built their lie on the assumption that Lucia left no trace, no evidence, no proof of her continued existence. This shatters that assumption. Maya held the bracelet, feeling the weight of it, both physical and metaphorical. She turned it over in her hands, seeing the craftsmanship, the care that had gone into creating something meant to last generations. Her grandfather, a man she'd never known existed until yesterday, had commissioned this for his daughter. He'd loved her enough to create something beautiful for her, and then he'd given her an ultimatum that destroyed her life. The contradiction was painful. The complexity of family and love and control twisted together in ways that had rippled forward through decades to shape Maya's own life. "Did she ever talk about them?" Maya asked quietly. "Her family? Did she tell you about her father, her brother?" Eleanor's expression grew distant. "Very little. She said her father was a brilliant businessman, but a traditional man who saw his daughter as a chess piece to be moved in service of the family's interests. Her younger brother Richard she described as ambitious and cold, someone who'd always resented that she was the eldest, that in a different culture she might have inherited control of the company instead of him. Her youngest brother James was kinder, gentler but weak, unwilling to stand against their father or Richard. She loved them in the complicated way you love family who've hurt you, but she also understood that they would never accept her for who she was, that her identity as a woman who loved women, who wanted to sing rather than marry, who dreamed of a life beyond the one they'd planned for her, was incompatible with their vision of the Lin family legacy. The pain in Eleanor's voice was raw, unhealed after 6 decades. Maya realized that for Eleanor, this wasn't just about money or justice or evening some old score. It was about giving Lucia, posthumously, the vindication she'd been denied in life. It was about forcing the Lin family to acknowledge that the daughter they'd erased had been real, had mattered, had left a legacy that extended beyond their control. Mrs. Ashford, Maya said carefully, "Why now? You've had this evidence for 60 years. You could have exposed the Lin family's fraud decades ago. Why wait until now, until my mother is dying, until I happened to sing in a restaurant where you were dining?" Eleanor was silent for a long moment, staring out at the gardens where shadows were lengthening as the sun descended. "Because I was a coward," she said finally. "Because after Lucia sent me these things and told me never to contact her again, I respected her wishes. She'd made her choice to disappear, to become someone else, and I told myself that honoring that choice was the loving thing to do. But the truth is I was protecting myself. Going after the Lin family would have meant exposing our relationship, explaining why I had Lucia's possessions, admitting to a world that wasn't ready to accept it that I'd loved a woman, that we'd planned a life together. I built my empire, my reputation, my legacy, and I told myself it was enough, that letting Lucia go was the price I'd paid for success." She turned to look at Maya, tears in her eyes. "But then I heard your voice, and it was like Lucia was there in that room, alive again, singing the way she used to sing to me in those stolen moments we had together. And I realized that I'd wasted 60 years, that I'd let fear and propriety and concern for my reputation keep me from finishing what Lucia and I started." She reached out and took Maya's hand. "You're not just her granddaughter. You're her legacy, her revenge, her proof that the Lin family couldn't erase her completely. And I'm going to make sure they pay for what they did, even if it's the last thing I accomplish in this life." The intensity of Eleanor's conviction was almost frightening. Maya understood that she wasn't just agreeing to a legal battle. She was becoming a weapon in a 60-year-old war, a proxy for two women who'd loved each other and been torn apart by families and societies that couldn't accept what they were. "There's something else," Eleanor said, releasing Maya's hand and reaching back into the box. "Something I haven't shown Diane yet because I wanted you to see it first." She pulled out a letter, the paper aged and delicate. "This was the last communication I received from Lucia, dated December 1964. In it, she tells me about your mother, about the pregnancy, about her new life. But she also tells me something else, something I didn't understand at the time, but which now seems crucial." Eleanor unfolded the letter carefully and began to read. "My dearest Eleanor, I hope this letter finds you well, though I know it will bring you pain. I've started over here in New York, become someone named Lucia Chun, a seamstress with a baby daughter. Catherine is beautiful, Eleanor. She has my eyes and my voice, and when she cries, I hear music in it. I know I hurt you by leaving, by cutting off all contact. I hope someday you can forgive me. But I need you to understand why I can never come back, why I can never be Lucilin again. It's not just about father's ultimatum or the scandal or even about us. It's about what I learned the night before I left, about why Richard was so eager to see me married off, to see me removed from any position of influence in the family." Eleanor paused, her voice dropping. "Father's will, his real will, not the trust document, gives me control of the company if anything happens to Richard. I'm the failsafe, the backup heir. Richard knows this. And the night before I left, I overheard him talking to someone on the phone. He was planning something, Eleanor. Planning to have me declared incompetent, to have me institutionalized for my unnatural affections. He'd found a doctor willing to diagnose me as mentally ill, to commit me to a private facility where I would sign over my rights to him. He was going to destroy me legally, lock me away, and take everything." Eleanor's hands trembled as she continued reading the letter. Lucia's words from 6 decades ago, filling the conservatory with their weight. "That's why I ran, Eleanor. Not because I was ashamed of loving you, not because I was weak, but because I knew if I stayed one more day, Richard would have me locked away in some sanitarium where no one would ever hear my voice again. The fake drowning was his idea, presented as a mercy. Disappear quietly in the family save's face, or resist and be destroyed publicly. I chose a third option. I chose to vanish so completely that not even Richard could find me. I chose survival over martyrdom, life over principle. I hope you can understand. I hope you can forgive me. Live well, my darling Eleanor. Sing the songs we never got to sing together. And if someday my daughter asks about me, about who I really was, tell her I was brave enough to love you, even if I wasn't brave enough to stay. Yours always, Lucia." The silence after Eleanor finished reading was profound, broken only by the ticking of an antique clock somewhere in the house. Maya sat, frozen, processing the revelation that transformed everything she thought she understood about her grandmother's flight. It hadn't been just about scandal or family pressure or impossible love. It'd been about survival, about escaping a brother who would have had her institutionalized, her rights stripped away, her voice silenced forever. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, the calculated nature of Richard Lin's plan to eliminate his sister as a threat to his control of the family empire. "This changes everything," Maya said finally, her voice hollow. "This isn't just about reclaiming an inheritance. It's about exposing an attempted kidnapping, a conspiracy to commit fraud and false imprisonment. If Richard Lin was willing to do that to his own sister 60 years ago, what's he willing to do now to protect his secret?" Eleanor folded the letter carefully and returned it to the box. "That's exactly what I've been asking myself since last night. Richard is 81 now, but he still controls Lin Enterprises. He's had 6 decades to consolidate power, to build walls around his empire. If we expose what he tried to do to Lucia, we don't just threaten his fortune. We threaten his legacy, his reputation, his freedom. Men like Richard don't go quietly. They fight with everything they have, legal and illegal. Maya stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the manicured gardens as darkness gathered at their edges. Do you think he'll try the same thing with me? Try to have me declared incompetent or create some scandal to discredit me? Eleanor joined her at the window, moving slowly, one hand pressed to her chest as if the previous night's cardiac event was still affecting her. I think he'll try everything, she said quietly. Character assassination, certainly. They'll dig into your life, find anything they can use against you. Financial problems, which you have through no fault of your own. The loss of your job. Your mother's illness, which they might try to spin as you being under duress, making irrational decisions out of desperation. They'll paint you as a con artist, a opportunist who heard a story and decided to exploit an old woman's sentimentality for financial gain. She turned to look at Maya directly. They may also go after Eleanor Ashford. Try to suggest I'm senile or being manipulated, that my involvement proves the claim is frivolous. They'll attack from every angle and they won't care about collateral damage. A sound from the doorway made them both turn. A man stood there, tall and distinguished, probably in his early 60s, wearing an expensive suit and an expression of concern. Mersas. Ashford, I apologize for interrupting, but we have a situation. Eleanor's face tightened. Maya, this is Charles Whitmore, my head of security. Charles, what's happened? There's been activity at the gates, Whitmore said, his voice professionally calm but carrying an undertone of urgency. 3 vehicles arrived approximately 10 minutes ago. They're not attempting entry, just positioned outside with a clear line of sight to the house. One is a van with equipment that suggests surveillance capability. I've contacted the local police, but given the position on a public road, there's little they can do unless there's an overt threat. Maya felt her stomach drop. They know. Somehow they already know I'm here. Whitmore nodded. I ran the plates. 2 of the vehicles are registered to a private investigation firm based in Hong Kong with offices in New York. The third is registered to a shell corporation that traces back to Lin Enterprises. They found you faster than we anticipated, which suggests they've been monitoring Mrs. Ashford's activities, possibly monitoring her communications. There may be a leak somewhere in the chain, or they simply moved very quickly once word of last night's incident at the Belvedere reached them. Eleanor's expression was grim but unsurprised. They have people everywhere. Of course they'd be watching me. I've been their competitor in the Asian market for decades. They know my history even if they don't know the specifics of my relationship with Lucia. The moment I showed interest in a young woman claiming Lin family connections, it would have triggered alarms. She turned to Maya. I'm sorry. I'd hoped we'd have more time to prepare, to build our case before they knew what we were doing. It seems we've underestimated their resources and reach. What do we do? Maya asked, fighting down panic. I can't go home. If they know I'm here, they know where I live. They'll be waiting for me. You stay here tonight, Eleanor said decisively. Charles will arrange for enhanced security. Diane will need to accelerate our timeline. File the claim immediately before the Lin family can preemptively move against us. She looked at Whitmore. I want a full security sweep of the property. Check for any surveillance devices, any signs of infiltration, and get Maya's mother moved to a private facility under an assumed name. They'll use her as leverage if they can, threaten her care or worse. I won't have Catherine Chun used as a pawn in this. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Whitmore coordinated with his security team, specialists who moved through the mansion with practiced efficiency, checking phones, computers, sweeping for listening devices. Diane arrived by helicopter, landing on a pad behind the house that Maya hadn't known existed, her face set with determination. They convened in Eleanor's study, a wood-paneled room dominated by a massive desk that had probably witnessed decades of business decisions that shaped industries. The atmosphere was tense, focused, the casual exploration of family history replaced by the urgent preparation for war. Diane laid out documents on the desk, speaking rapidly. The Lin family is already moving. In the past 6 hours, they've retained 3 separate law firms in New York, Hong Kong, and London. They've filed preemptive motions in Hong Kong court claiming jurisdiction over any matters related to the family trust. They've also, and this is concerning, hired a crisis management firm specializing in discrediting whistleblowers and accusers. This isn't defensive preparation. This is scorched earth strategy. They're going to come at us with everything. She looked at Maya. Are you prepared for what that means? They'll investigate every aspect of your life. They'll contact everyone you've ever known, looking for dirt or creating it if they can't find it. They'll make you wish you'd never heard the name Lin. Maya thought of her mother, already being quietly transferred by Eleanor's people to a private facility where the Lin family couldn't reach her. She thought of Marcus Crane's threatening text, the casual cruelty of someone who believed power made them untouchable. She thought of her grandmother, who'd chosen to disappear rather than be destroyed, who'd given up everything to stay free. I'm prepared, Maya said, her voice steady. File the claim. Let them come. Diane nodded, satisfied with the resolve she saw. Then we move now. Tonight. I'll file a New York federal court claiming the Lynn Family Trust has engaged in ongoing fraud and conversion of assets rightfully belonging to Lucia Lynn's heirs. We'll request immediate injunction preventing them from moving assets or altering the trust structure pending resolution. We'll submit the bracelet, the photographs, the provenance documentation, and Eleanor's testimony establishing Lucia's identity and survival past 1963. She paused. We'll also need your DNA sample to submit to the court, along with a petition compelling the Lynn family to provide samples for comparison. The genetic link will be crucial. A technician was called in, a woman with a medical kit who took Maya's DNA sample with professional efficiency, sealing it in sterile containers that would be couriered to the laboratory under chain of custody protocols. The process felt surreal, almost ceremonial, this extraction of genetic material that would prove or disprove a connection to people Maya had never met. A family that existed in old photographs and legal documents. As the technician left, Diane's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her expression darkened. We have another problem. Marcus Crane just posted on social media. She turned her phone screen toward them. It showed a video clearly taken at the Belvedere the previous night showing Maya singing in the middle of the dining. Her face clear, her voice audible over the restaurant noise. The caption read, "When servers get desperate." This woman sang for $1 million tip at the Belvedere last night. I was joking, obviously, but she took it seriously. It's cringe level. Maximum. The post already had thousands of views, hundreds of comments mocking Maya, calling her pathetic, desperate, delusional. Maya felt heat flood her face, shame and rage warring in her chest. He recorded it. He humiliated me and then recorded it to mock me publicly. Diane was already typing on her laptop. This is actually helpful. It establishes a pattern of harassment and gives us grounds for an emergency restraining order. He's essentially confessing to the setup, showing premeditation. She looked up. Maya, I know this is humiliating, but it's also evidence. It shows his intent to cause you emotional distress, which strengthens our civil case against him. Eleanor's expression was cold fury. Charles, she said quietly, I want you to make some calls. Marcus Crane has investors, board members, business partners. I want them to know that I'm personally interested in his activity, that anyone doing business with him should understand he's currently being sued for harassment fraud. I want his world to get very uncomfortable, very quick. Not illegal, just inconvenient. Whitmore nodded and left the room, already pulling out his phone. Maya watched Eleanor, seeing the calculated deployment of power, the way wealth and influence could be weaponized with a few phone calls, a few quiet conversations. This was what it meant to have resources, to be able to fight back, not just legally, but economically, socially, to make someone like Marcus Crane understand that there were consequences for casual cruelty. The study's landline rang, an old-fashioned sound that seemed out of place in the modern crisis. Eleanor answered it, listened for a moment, then her face paled. I see. Thank you for informing me. She hung up and turned to face them. That was my contact at the New York Times. The Lynn family has issued a press release. They're getting ahead of our filing, controlling the narrative. She pulled up the release on her computer and read aloud. The Lynn family categorically denies any claims made by individuals falsely alleging connection to Lucia Lynn, who tragically died in 1963. We are aware of attempts by con artists and opportunists to exploit our family's grief and legacy for financial gain. We will defend our family's reputation vigorously and have full confidence that the legal system will expose these fraudulent claims for what they are. They're calling me a con artist before I've even filed the claim, Maya said, her voice shaking. They're poisoning public opinion, making it seem like I'm attacking them rather than reclaiming what was stolen. That's exactly what they're doing, Diane confirmed. It's classic preemptive PR strategy, but it also shows they're worried. If they were confident in their position, they wouldn't need to make public statements. They'd simply let the legal process play out. The fact that they're already trying to shape public perception means they know they're vulnerable, that our evidence is strong enough to worry that. She began packing up her laptop. I'm filing tonight. Within an hour, the claim will be on record, and then it becomes a matter of public legal proceeding. The court of public opinion matters, but the court of law matters more. We'll need to prepare you for media attention, Maya. They'll want interviews, statements. We'll craft a narrative that humanizes you, that tells Lucia's story as one of survival and courage rather than scandal and shame. Eleanor stood, moving to a painting on the wall, an abstract piece in blues and golds. Behind it was a safe, which she opened with a combination her fingers knew automatically. She retrieved another item, this one wrapped in silk. I want Maya to have this, she said, unwrapping it to reveal a photograph in a silver frame. It showed two women, one clearly Lucia in her 20s, the other a younger Eleanor, both in casual clothes, sitting on a beach, laughing at something outside the frame. They looked happy, unselfconsciously joyful in a way that seemed impossible given the circumstances of their relationship, the hiding and fear that must have surrounded them. This was taken in 1962, Eleanor said softly, handing the frame to Maya. We stole a weekend away, told our respective families we were traveling for business. We went to a small beach in the Philippines where no one knew us. where we could be ourselves for just a few days. This photograph is the only one that exists of us together, the only proof that what we had was real and not just wishful memory. I want you to have it because you're fighting not just for money, but for the truth of Lucia's life, for the acknowledgement that she existed, that she loved, that she mattered, that we mattered. Maya took the photograph, studying the faces of the two young women who'd been denied their chance at happiness by families and societies that couldn't accept what they were. She saw her grandmother's joy, unguarded and pure, and felt a connection across time that was more profound than genetics or inheritance. This wasn't about money anymore, if it ever really had been. This was about justice for a woman who'd been forced to erase herself to stay free, about vindication for a love that had been real and true, even if the world had deemed it impossible. I'll make them acknowledge her, Maya said quietly, her voice carrying a conviction that surprised her. I'll make them say her name, admit what they did, face what they tried to bury. I promise you that. The legal filing went through at 11:47 that night, and by midnight, Maya's phone began exploding with calls and messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Reporters, mostly, having somehow obtained her contact information within minutes of the court documents becoming public record. Diane had warned her this would happen, had instructed her to say nothing, to direct all inquiries to the law firm, but the sheer volume was overwhelming. She turned off her phone finally, surrendering it to Whit, who promised to monitor it for anything genuinely important while filtering out the media circus. Eleanor arranged for Maya to stay in a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment, with a bathroom that had heated floors and a shower with 6 different settings. Under different circumstances, Maya might have found the luxury amusing or intimidating, but exhaustion had caught up with her, the adrenaline that had sustained her through the day finally depleting. She fell asleep still dressed, curled on top of silk sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and dreamed of her grandmother singing in a club in Hong Kong, her voice filling the smoke-hazed air while men in expensive suits watched and applauded, never knowing they were witnessing someone who would soon choose to vanish rather than be caged. She woke to knocking at the door, disoriented by the unfamiliar room, early morning light filtering through curtains she didn't remember closing. A staff member, the same woman who'd greeted her the previous evening, stood in the hallway with a breakfast tray. "Mrs. Ashford requests your presence in her study at your earliest convenience," the woman said politely. "There have been developments overnight." Maya showered quickly, changed into clothes that someone had thoughtfully laundered while she slept, and made her way downstairs. The mansion felt different in daylight, less imposing, the rooms visible through open doors showing spaces designed for living rather than just displaying wealth. She found the study where Eleanor, Diane, and Whitmore were already assembled, all looking like they'd been awake for hours. Coffee was poured without her needing to ask, and Maya accepted it gratefully. "The Lin family responded to our filing," Diane said without preamble. "They've requested an emergency hearing to dismiss the case, claiming it lacks merit and was filed in the wrong jurisdiction. The hearing is scheduled for this afternoon at 2 p.m. in federal court." "That's impossibly fast," Maya said. "Don't cases usually take months to get before a judge?" "They have connections and influence," Diane replied. "They called in favors to get expedited consideration. But it works in our favor too. The faster this moves, the less time they have to build their defense and manufacture evidence." The judge assigned to the case is Margaret Brennan, who has a reputation for not being impressed by wealth or corporate power. She's fair, thorough, and she doesn't like attempts to manipulate her courtroom. If we present our evidence clearly, she'll see through the Lin family's attempt to dismiss this without proper examination. Eleanor was reading something on her tablet, her expression grave. "There's more. The Lin family has issued another statement, this one more aggressive. They're claiming that I'm using Maya as a proxy in a personal vendetta, that I've manufactured this entire claim as revenge for an unspecified business dispute decades ago. They're trying to make this about me rather than about Lucia's legitimate inheritance rights." She looked up at Maya. "They're also suggesting that you're mentally unstable, that you've been manipulated by a lonely old woman into believing a fantasy. They've somehow obtained records showing your conservatory withdrawal, your mother's medical bills, your recent job loss. They're painting you as desperate and delusional." "How did they get that information so fast?" Maya asked, feeling violated. "That's supposed to be private." "Money opens doors," Whitmore said quietly. "And the Lin family has extensive resources. They would have had investigators working through the night, bribing or pressuring people for access to records that should be protected. It's illegal, but proving it is difficult, and by the time we could take legal action, the damage is done. The information is out there, shaping perception." Diane's expression was steel. "We countered with the evidence. The bracelet with its provenance, Eleanor's testimony about receiving it directly from Lucia, the photographs proving Lucia's identity, the letter explaining why she fled, and most importantly, we pressed for the DNA comparison. Genetic evidence doesn't lie and can't be dismissed as the fantasies of desperate or manipulated people. Once we prove Maya's genetic link to the Lin family, their entire narrative collapses." The morning passed in preparation, Diane drilling Maya on potential questions, on how to present herself, on the importance of remaining calm and credible, regardless of what accusations were thrown at her. Whitmore coordinated security for the courthouse trip, arranging for vehicles and routes that would avoid media when possible. Eleanor made phone calls, speaking quietly in her study to people whose names Maya didn't catch, but whose importance was clear from Eleanor's deferential tone. This was the machinery of power in motion, the deployment of decades of accumulated influence and relationships in service of a single goal. They left for the courthouse at noon, a convoy of 3 vehicles with Whitmore's security team creating a protective bubble around Maya and Eleanor. The media was waiting at the courthouse steps, cameras and microphones forming a gauntlet they had to push through. Questions were shouted, most of them hostile or skeptical. Is it true you're claiming to be a billionaire's granddaughter? How much money are you hoping to get? Do you have any shame exploiting an old woman's loneliness? Maya kept her head down, following Diane's instructions, saying nothing, letting her lawyer run interference while Whitmore's team created physical space. They made it inside, through security, up to the courtroom where the hearing would take place. Quote, the Lynn family's legal team was already there, a phalanx of expensive suits surrounding a man who could only be Richard Lynn. He was 81 but looked younger, his posture erect, his face showing the kind of ageless quality that came from wealth and access to the best medical care money could buy. He had Lucia's eyes, Maya realized with a shock. The same shape, the same intensity, though his were cold where Lucia's had been warm in the photographs Maya had seen. He looked at her as she entered the courtroom, and his expression was pure contempt, the look of someone regarding an insect that had dared to crawl onto his dinner plate. Beside Richard stood a younger man, perhaps in his 50s, who bore a strong family resemblance. His son or nephew, Maya guessed. The next generation of Lynn power preparing to defend their empire. The legal team numbered at least 8 attorneys, all carrying briefcases and tablets, all radiating the expensive competence of people who'd never lost a case because they had the resources to bury opposition under paper and procedural delays. Maya felt suddenly small, acutely aware that she was a 23-year-old former waitress going up against one of Asia's most powerful families. Eleanor must have sensed her fear because she leaned close and whispered, remember, you have something they don't, the truth. And the law, for all its flaws, still recognizes truth when it's properly presented. The judge entered and everyone rose. Margaret Brennan was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes, wearing her judicial robes with the authority of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms and had seen every trick and manipulation the legal system could produce. She took her seat, surveyed both legal teams with an expression that suggested she already knew this was going to be complicated, and gestured for everyone to sit. This is a motion to dismiss filed by the defendant. Richard Lynn and Lynn Enterprises, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. They claim that the plaintiff's case lacks merit, was filed in improper jurisdiction, and amounts to harassment. Miss Reeves, you're representing the plaintiff. Make your case for why this motion should be denied. Diane stood, projecting confidence and authority. Your Honor, the plaintiff, Maya Chun, is the granddaughter of Lucia Lynn, entitled to a 20% share of the Lynn Family Trust established in 1958. Lucia Lynn did not die in 1963 as the defendants have claimed for 6 decades. She survived, changed her identity, and lived in New York until her death in 2010. Her share of the trust, now worth approximately $1.6 billion, was never legally transferred and rightfully belongs to her heirs. We have irrefutable evidence of Lucia Lynn's identity and survival, including jewelry with documented provenance, photographs, letters, and witness testimony. We also request the court compelled DNA testing to establish the genetic relationship between Maya Chun and the Lynn family. The Lynn family's lead attorney stood, a man with silver hair and a voice that dripped with condescension. Your Honor, this is a transparent attempt at extortion dressed up as a legal claim. Plaintiff is a financially desperate young woman who has been manipulated by Eleanor Ashford, who has her own history of business disputes with my clients. Lucia Lynn died tragically in 1963. The family mourned her loss and moved forward. The trust was properly administered according to the terms established by Thomas Lynn. Any claim that Lucia Lynn survived and somehow has heirs appearing 60 years later is absurd on its face. We move for immediate dismissal with prejudice and sanctions against the plaintiff and her counsel for filing a frivolous claim. Judge Brennan held up a hand. I've reviewed the initial filings from both parties. Ms. Reeves, you've submitted what appears to be substantial documentary evidence. The bracelet, the photographs, the letter from Lucia Lynn to Eleanor Ashford. These aren't nothing. How do the defendants explain the existence of these items if Lucia Lynn died in 1963? The silver-haired attorney didn't miss a beat. The items could be stolen, forged, or obtained through fraud. The letter could be a fabrication. Without proper chain of custody, without authenticated handwriting analysis, without contemporaneous verification, these items prove nothing except that someone has gone to considerable effort to manufacture a false claim. As for DNA testing, Your Honor, my clients refuse to submit to such invasive procedures based on the unsubstantiated claims of a stranger. Their privacy rights supersede the plaintiff's fishing expedition. Diane responded immediately. The defendant's refusal to participate in DNA testing is itself evidence of their... Your Honor, if they're so certain Maya-chan has no genetic connection to the Lin family, proving that through DNA would end this case immediately. Their refusal suggests they know the test would confirm what we're claiming, that Maya is indeed Lucia Lin's granddaughter. Judge Brennan made notes, her expression thoughtful. The court will review the documentary evidence in detail before ruling on the motion to dismiss. However, I'm inclined to allow this case to proceed to discovery. The plaintiff has presented sufficient evidence to warrant further investigation. As for DNA testing, she looked directly at Richard Lin. I'm ordering both parties to submit samples within 72 hours. If the plaintiff is lying, Mr. Lin, the genetic evidence will prove it conclusively. Your refusal to cooperate strikes me as suspicious. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Richard Lin's face darkened with rage and he leaned forward to whisper urgently to his attorneys. The silver-haired lawyer stood again. Your Honor, we object strenuously to this court order. The defendants have constitutional protections against unreasonable search and seizure. A DNA sample is a bodily intrusion that requires probable cause. We haven't been given due process. Judge Brennan's expression hardened. This is a civil matter involving a trust worth billions of dollars and allegations of 6 decades of fraud. Establishing genetic relationships is directly relevant to the plaintiff's claim. I find there is sufficient cause to warrant DNA testing. If you wish to appeal my order, you're welcome to do so, but the testing will proceed. My ruling stands. The DNA samples were collected 3 days later in a sterile medical office under court supervision, witnessed by representatives from both legal teams and sealed with chain of custody protocols that would make them admissible as evidence. Maya submitted her sample first, a simple cheek swab that took seconds but felt monumental. This extraction of genetic code that would either validate everything or reveal her as a fraud. Richard Lin submitted his with visible contempt, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with fury at being compelled to participate in what he clearly viewed as a degrading charade orchestrated by people far beneath his station. The waiting period for results was estimated at 2 weeks, but the laboratory, under pressure from the court and presumably incentivized by Eleanor's resources, promised expedited processing. 10 days, they said. 10 days until genetic truth would either confirm or demolish Maya's claim. Those 10 days were simultaneously the longest and shortest of Maya's life. She remained at Eleanor's estate, which had become a fortress, security teams monitoring the perimeter, all visitors vetted, all communications screened. The media attention had intensified. News outlets running stories that ranged from sympathetic portraits of a young woman fighting for her inheritance to scathing exposes painting her as a con artist. Public opinion was divided, and Maya learned to stop reading the comments, to ignore the strangers on the internet who felt entitled to judge her character and motivations based on headlines and sound bites. Her mother, Catherine, was in the private facility Eleanor had arranged, receiving treatment that Maya couldn't have afforded in a lifetime of working double shifts. The stronger medications, the experimental therapies, the round-the-clock care, all of it was being provided at Eleanor's expense with the understanding that if Maya's claim succeeded, she would reimburse these costs. If the claim failed, Eleanor had made clear she expected nothing in return. This is about Lucia, she'd said simply, about giving her daughter the care and dignity she deserves, regardless of what happens with the trust. Catherine's condition had stabilized, the aggressive pain management allowing her to have lucid hours where she could read, talk, even laugh. Maya visited daily, sitting beside her mother's bed, telling carefully edited versions of what was happening, protecting her from the full weight of the battle being waged in courtrooms and media outlets. On the 8th day of waiting, Marcus Crane attempted to enter Eleanor's estate. Security stopped him at the gate, but he stood there for 20 minutes shouting demands to see Maya to talk to Eleanor, his composure finally cracking under the pressure that had been building since his social media post had triggered a cascade of consequences. Eleanor's quiet phone calls had worked their magic. Crane Technologies board had demanded his resignation as CEO following revelations about his pattern of harassment and the lawsuit filed by Maya's legal team. His investors had distanced themselves, several pulling funding from projects he'd championed. His reputation, built on the image of a brilliant disruptor, had been dismantled by stories from former employees about his abusive behavior, his casual cruelty, his belief that wealth and power exempted him from basic human decency. Maya watched on the security monitors as he ranted at the gate and felt not satisfaction but a kind of sad recognition that his fall, while just, wouldn't undo the humiliation he'd inflicted, wouldn't erase the memory of singing in that restaurant for $1 million that had never existed. The DNA results arrived on day 10 via secure courier, delivered simultaneously to the court. Both legal teams and the laboratory's secure database. Diane called Maya into Eleanor's study where the entire team had assembled, and the atmosphere was electric with tension. Diane's face was carefully neutral as she opened the envelope, read the contents, and then looked up with a smile that transformed her usually severe expression into something approaching joy. 99.97% probability that Maya Chun and Richard Lin share a recent common ancestor, she read aloud. The genetic markers are consistent with Maya being Richard's great-niece through his sister Lucia. The science is unequivocal. You are exactly who you claim to be, Maya. You are Lucia Lin's granddaughter. You are Lin family heir." The room erupted in controlled celebration, Eleanor reaching for Maya's hand with tears streaming down her face, Whitmore allowing himself a rare smile, Diane already on her phone coordinating next steps. But Maya felt strangely numb, the validation she'd fought for arriving not as triumph but as anticlimax. A simple confirmation of a truth she'd always known in her bones. She was Lucia's granddaughter. She carried her voice, her features, her DNA. The Lin family had tried to erase Lucia from history, and they had failed because Lucia had lived on, had survived, had created a legacy they couldn't destroy no matter how thoroughly they'd buried the truth. The Lin family's response came within 2 hours. Richard Lin requested an emergency meeting, not in court but in private, with full confidentiality agreements. He was willing, Diane reported with barely concealed satisfaction, to discuss settlement. They met in a neutral conference room in a midtown hotel, security outside, lawyers flanking both parties. Richard Lin looked diminished, older, the arrogance that had radiated from him in the courtroom replaced by the wary calculation of someone who'd finally encountered an opponent they couldn't intimidate or dismiss. He didn't look at Maya directly, addressing his comments to Diane and Eleanor as if Maya herself didn't merit his acknowledgement. "The genetic results are inconclusive," he began, but his lawyer placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "We're prepared to offer a settlement," the silver-haired attorney said smoothly. $10 million paid immediately in exchange for Maya Chun signing away any and all claims to the Lin family trust and agreeing to a permanent non-disclosure agreement regarding this matter. $10 million. It was a fortune, more money than Maya could conceptualize, enough to save her mother, to secure their future, to never worry about medical bills or rent or where the next meal came from. But it was also 6% of what she was legally owed, a fraction designed to make her go away quietly, to buy her silence about what the Lin family had done to her grandmother. Diane started to respond, but Maya spoke first, her voice clear and steady. "No." Richard Lin finally looked at her directly, his expression shocked. "What did you say?" "I said no," Maya repeated. "You're offering me $10 million to forget that you tried to have your sister institutionalized, that you stole her inheritance, that you've spent 60 years perpetuating a lie about her death. $10 million to pretend none of that happened, to sign a contract that would prevent me from ever telling her story." She leaned forward, meeting his cold eyes with determination she hadn't known she possessed. "My grandmother gave up everything rather than let you destroy her. She lived in poverty, worked in a sweatshop, died without ever seeing justice for what you did. I'm not going to dishonor her memory by accepting your guilt money and your silence." Richard's face contorted with rage. "You stupid girl," he hissed, his composure finally shattering completely. "You have no idea what you're rejecting. That money could change your life. Instead, you'll spend years in litigation, watching your mother die while lawyers bleed you dry. And in the end, you'll get nothing because I will fight you with every resource I have until one of us is dead." His own lawyer tried to quiet him, but Richard was past caring. His grandmother was a pervert and a coward who ran away rather than face her responsibilities. She chose poverty and obscurity because you're just like her. Eleanor Ashford, who had been silent until this moment, stood slowly, her presence filling the room. "Richard Lin," she said, her voice cutting through his tirade like a blade, "I've waited 60 years to say this directly to your face. You are a coward and a fraud who built your empire on theft and intimidation. Lucia was worth 100 of you. She had more courage in her smallest finger than you've displayed in your entire miserable life. And this young woman, her granddaughter, has that same courage. She's going to destroy you, Richard, not with violence or threats, but with truth and the law. And I'm going to be alive long enough to watch it happen." The settlement meeting ended with Richard Lin storming out, his legal team scrambling to follow, leaving threats and counteroffers in his wake. But the battle was essentially over. The DNA results had been made public by court order, and media coverage shifted dramatically. Sympathetic profiles of Lucia Lin began appearing. Stories about a courageous woman who'd given up wealth to live authentic, who'd survived prejudice and family betrayal to build a quiet life of dignity in Chinatown. Interviews with people who'd known her, former neighbors and co-workers who remembered a gentle seamstress with a beautiful singing voice and kind eyes, painted a portrait that countered the Lin family's attempts at character assassination. 3 months later, Judge Brennan ruled from the bench. The Lin Family Trust had engaged in continuous fraud for 60 years. Richard Lin had no legal authority to manage Lucia Lin's 20% share. That share, with 6 decades of accumulated value, rightfully belonged to Lucia's heirs. The total amount, including growth and dividends, $1.8 billion. Richard Lin appealed, of course, but the appellate court upheld the ruling. And finally, reluctantly, the Lin family negotiated a true settlement. Maya would receive her full inheritance, paid out over 3 years. The family would issue a public apology acknowledging Lucia Lin's existence in their wrongful appropriation of her trust share. And most importantly to Maya, they would establish the Luce Lin Foundation for LGBTQ rights and support, funded with an additional $100 million, ensuring that her grandmother's story would be told, that her courage would inspire others facing similar circumstances. Catherine Chun lived to see her daughter's victory. The experimental treatments buying her not years but precious months, where she was lucid and pain-free enough to understand what had happened, to know that her mother's name had been cleared, that justice had finally arrived. She died peacefully in her sleep 6 months after the settlement, with Maya holding her hand. In a private room filled with flowers and surrounded by photographs of Lucia, the grandmother she'd loved, the legend she'd never fully understood. At the funeral, Eleanor Ashford stood beside Maya, both women in black, both grieving the loss of someone who connected them across time and love and shared history. Maya sang at the service, her voice filling the chapel with a Cantonese lullaby Lucia had sung to her when she was small, and Eleanor wept openly, hearing in Maya's voice the echo of the woman she'd loved and lost so many years ago. Marcus Crane settled his harassment lawsuit quietly, paying an undisclosed sum and issuing a public apology. His career never recovered, the fall from grace complete and permanent, a cautionary tale about the consequences of cruelty. The Belvedere closed its doors 18 months later, unable to survive the scandal and the revelation that they'd enabled abuse of their staff. And Maya, who'd started this journey as a desperate waitress singing for $1 million that didn't exist, became not just wealthy but purposeful, using her inheritance to fund arts education, to support struggling musicians, to ensure that talent and dreams weren't crushed by poverty and circumstance. She established a scholarship at the Manhattan Conservatory in Lucia's name, giving young singers the opportunities her grandmother had been denied. On the first anniversary of Catherine's death, Maya stood in Eleanor's conservatory beside the grand piano and sang for an audience of one. Eleanor, now 88 and increasingly frail, listened with closed eyes, and when Maya finished, the old woman opened her eyes and smiled. "She would have been so proud of you," Eleanor whispered. Boucher would have been so incredibly proud. Maya thought of her grandmother, of the woman in the photographs who'd chosen freedom over fortune, who'd sung in underground clubs and loved a woman when the world said it was impossible, who'd run away to protect herself and built a life from nothing. She thought of the single sentence she'd spoken in a diner that had unlocked this entire story, revealing connections and conspiracies that had shaped 3 generations, and she understood finally that voices, once raised, could never be truly silenced. They echoed forward through time, through daughters and granddaughters, through songs and stories, through the simple act of refusing to be erased. Her grandmother had sung her truth in jazz clubs in Hong Kong. Maya had sung hers in a restaurant for people who'd tried to humiliate her. And together, across the gap of years and death, they had sung justice into existence, had made their voices heard above the noise of power and privilege and institutional indifference. The phoenix, Maya realized, remembering the bracelet and its symbolism, didn't just rise from ashes. It sang while it burned, transforming destruction into defiance, ensuring that even in death, its voice would carry forward to light fires in others. Lucia had been that phoenix, and now, so was Maya.